Have you ever been with a man who made you feel like you were going crazy? You sensed he wasn't fully there, not really loving you, but you couldn't prove it. According to Carl Jung, that unsettling feeling isn't paranoia. It's your unconscious recognizing his. Today, we'll break down 7 subtle but powerful signs, rooted in Jung's theories, that expose when a man was using you, not loving you. Because the first step to reclaiming your power isn't just spotting red flags, it's understanding why they were invisible to you in the first place. 1. The mirror of projection. One of the most unsettling experiences in any relationship is when a man swings wildly between putting you on a pedestal and tearing you down, sometimes in the same conversation. At first, it feels intoxicating to be seen as perfect, as if he recognizes something magical in you that others have missed. The compliments flow effortlessly, the attention is relentless, and the connection feels faded. But then, without warning, the script flips. Suddenly, you're too emotional, too demanding, or somehow flawed in ways that contradict his earlier praise. This whiplash isn't random. According to Carl Jung, it's a classic case of projection, where a person disowns the parts of themselves they can't accept and unconsciously assigns them to someone else. Jung believed that the human psyche is divided, with the shadow representing everything we deny about ourselves, our insecurities, repressed desires, and unresolved wounds. When a man hasn't confronted his own shadow, he projects those hidden qualities onto his partner. In the early stages, he might project his anima, his idealized version of femininity, onto you, making you the embodiment of beauty, grace, or salvation. This explains lovebombing. He's not really seeing you, he's seeing a fantasy. But when reality intrudes, when you express needs, flaws, or individuality, his unconscious panic triggers devaluation. Now, you become the container for everything he hates about himself: neediness, imperfection, or vulnerability. This pattern is especially common in men who haven't done the inner work to integrate their shadow. For example, a man who secretly fears he's unworthy of love might initially worship you, only to later punish you for making him feel dependent. Or a man who struggles with repressed anger might accuse you of being volatile when you react to his passive-aggressive behavior. The key insight here is that projection isn't about you, it's about his inability to face his own depths. The damage of this dynamic isn't just emotional whiplash. It erodes your sense of reality. When someone projects onto you relentlessly, you start questioning your own perceptions. Was I too clingy, or was he just distant? Did I overreact, or was he actually cruel? Jung warned that failing to recognize projection keeps us trapped in unconscious relationships, where both parties act out scripts they don't understand. The way out? Spotting the signs early. If a man's admiration feels impersonal, more about how you make him feel than who you actually are, or if his criticisms seem oddly disproportionate, you're likely dealing with projection. And that's a game you can't win, because you were never really playing. You were just standing in for the parts of himself he refused to see. 2. The lack of reciprocal vulnerability. One of the most telling signs that a man was using you rather than truly loving you lies in the imbalance of emotional exchange. You may have found yourself constantly sharing your fears, dreams, and past wounds, while he remained curiously guarded, offering just enough to keep you engaged but never matching your depth. He might have asked probing questions, encouraged you to open up, and even positioned himself as a devoted listener. Yet when it came time for him to reveal himself, the conversation always steered back to you. At first, this could feel flattering, as if he were entirely focused on your needs. But over time, it creates a strange emptiness, a relationship where you're the only one truly exposed. This one-sided vulnerability isn't accidental. In Jungian terms, it's a defense mechanism rooted in the shadow self, the parts of our psyche we suppress out of shame or fear. A man who avoids sharing his inner world isn't simply private. He's often unconsciously terrified of confronting his own unresolved pain. True intimacy requires both people to stand in the light of their full humanity, flaws, past mistakes, and unmet longings included. But if he hasn't faced his own shadow, the prospect of being truly seen feels dangerous. Instead of risking self-disclosure, he keeps the focus on you, turning the relationship into a performance where he remains safely behind the curtain. The toll this takes is subtle but corrosive. When emotional labor isn't reciprocal, you're left doing all the work of bonding while he reaps the benefits of connection without the cost. He may have used your openness to create a false sense of closeness, all while withholding the very thing that would make the relationship real, his authentic self. Over time, this breeds resentment, not just toward him, but toward yourself. You might look back and wonder why you gave so much to someone who gave so little in return. But the truth is, his inability to be vulnerable wasn't a reflection of your worth. It was a limitation of his own emotional capacity, a sign that he was using your warmth to fill a void he wasn't brave enough to face himself. Jung taught that we can only love others as deeply as we're willing to know ourselves. A man who refuses to explore his own depths will always keep relationships shallow. If you recognize this pattern, it's not just a red flag about him. It's an invitation to reflect on why you accepted so little. Did you mistake his listening for love? Did you hope that if you shared enough, he'd eventually reciprocate? These questions aren't about blame, but about reclaiming your power. Because the right man won't just hold space for your heart. He'll trust you with his too. 3. The convenient relationship. There comes a moment in many imbalanced relationships when you realize, with quiet devastation, that you were never truly loved. You were simply useful. The dynamic revolved around his needs, his physical desires, his emotional validation, his practical demands. Whether it was late-night texts when he was lonely, unwavering support for his ambitions while yours went unacknowledged, or favors that drained your time and energy without reciprocation, the relationship functioned like a one-way street. At first, you might have rationalized it as temporary, he's just going through a lot right now, but over time, the pattern became undeniable. You were playing a role in his life, not sharing one with him. This transactional dynamic is rarely conscious or malicious. In Jungian psychology, it often stems from what Marie-Louise von Franz called the pure eternus, Latin for eternal boy, an archetype representing men who remain psychologically adolescent, avoiding responsibility and adult commitment. The pure thrives on novelty, freedom, and being served, while resisting anything that demands sustained effort or emotional maturity. He doesn't see partners as equals. They exist to meet his needs, whether as lovers, therapists, or caretakers. When a woman challenges this arrangement, by asking for more consistency, deeper investment, or simply fairness, the pure often flees, either literally or by withdrawing emotionally. His terror isn't of you, but of the growth you're inadvertently demanding. What makes this so insidious is how it erodes your self-worth over time. You might have found yourself thinking, if I just give more, he'll finally step up. But the pure doesn't operate on reciprocity. He's trapped in what Jung called a provisional life, always waiting for some future moment when he'll magically become the person he imagines himself to be. Until then, relationships are merely tools to sustain his fantasy of endless potential without the grind of actualization. The sex, the admiration, the practical support you provide aren't cherished as gifts. They're consumed like resources, fueling his avoidance of true adulthood. Breaking free from this dynamic requires recognizing that no amount of giving will transform a man who refuses to grow. The purest journey is his alone, and until he faces his fear of limitation, aging, and accountability, he'll keep using relationships as escapes rather than commitments. If you see your past in this pattern, know this: You weren't discarded because you weren't enough. You were released because your authenticity threatened his delusion. And that's the greatest proof that what he offered wasn't love. It was the shadow of a boy who hadn't yet learned how to be a man. For gaslighting your intuition. One of the most disturbing signs you were being used is that lingering sense of confusion, the way you constantly second-guessed yourself, replaying conversations to figure out what was real. He'd say one thing but do another, dismiss your concerns as paranoia, or twist situations so you ended up apologizing for reactions he provoked. Over time, you started questioning your own memory, emotions, and even sanity. This wasn't accidental. It's a psychological phenomenon Carl Jung would recognize as the shadow's manipulation of your anima, your innate feminine intuition, to keep you disoriented and under control. Jung taught that the anima represents a woman's unconscious wisdom, her gut feelings and emotional intelligence. When a man is unwilling to confront his own shadow, his hidden motives or flaws, he may unconsciously attack your anima to silence its inconvenient truths. For example, if you sensed he was lying and confronted him, he might have flipped the script. "You're so insecure. This is why I can't be open with you." Suddenly, the issue isn't his deception, but your overreaction. This tactic serves two purposes. It distracts from his behavior, and it trains you to distrust your own perceptions. The more unintegrated his shadow is, the more shame, deceit, or manipulation he's hiding, the harder he'll work to destabilize your intuition, because your clarity threatens his fragile self-image. The tragedy of this dynamic is how it isolates you from your deepest knowing. Women conditioned to prioritize harmony over truth often tolerate these mind games far too long, rationalizing, "Maybe I am too sensitive." But that self-doubt is precisely what the shadow seeks to cultivate. Jung warned that when we reject our anima's guidance, whether to please others or avoid conflict, we fall into what he called participation mystique, a dangerous enmeshment where you absorb his distorted reality as your own. The way out isn't just leaving the relationship, but reclaiming trust in yourself. Every time you dismissed a gut feeling to keep the peace, you weren't being foolish, you were being manipulated. And that voice you learned to silence? It was always your wisest ally. If you recognize this pattern, understand, the confusion wasn't your failure. It was evidence of his fractured psyche trying to fracture yours. Real love doesn't make you question your sanity, it makes you feel more grounded in it. The right partner won't fear your intuition, he'll respect it, because he has nothing to hide from the light. 5. The disposable dynamic. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from realizing you were never truly irreplaceable to someone, that the connection you thought was unique could be so easily replicated with someone new. Whether he moved on immediately after the breakup, kept a roster of interchangeable partners, or simply treated you as if your presence was convenient rather than cherished, this disposable dynamic reveals a brutal truth. You weren't loved as a person, but used as a placeholder. Jungian psychology helps us understand this cruel behavior not as a reflection of your worth, but as a symptom of his psychological immaturity. His inability to see women as fully human rather than symbolic functions serving his needs. At the heart of this pattern lies what Jung called archetypal objectification, the reduction of a person to a role, lover, caretaker, status symbol, that exists to fulfill an unconscious void. When a man hasn't done the work to integrate his anima, his inner feminine principle, he relates to women through the lens of projection rather than genuine connection. You weren't you to him, you were a mirror reflecting whatever he needed at the time: validation, sexual gratification, emotional labor. This explains why he could replace you so effortlessly. It wasn't you he valued, but the temporary purpose you served. The same way one might discard a tool after use, he discarded the relationship once your utility expired. Not out of malice, but because his psyche couldn't recognize the sacredness of individual human connection. This dynamic is especially prevalent in men who suffer from what Jung termed pure eternus, eternal boy, energy, a refusal to grow up and take responsibility for their impact on others. The pure thrives on novelty and avoids depth, cycling through relationships the way a child tires of toys. What makes this so devastating isn't just the abandonment, but the retroactive erasure of your shared history. When you see him replicate the same patterns, inside jokes, or even vulnerabilities with someone new weeks later, it can feel like your entire relationship was a lie. But the painful truth is more nuanced. It was real to you because you showed up as your authentic self. For him, it was never about you at all. It was about avoiding the terrifying vulnerability of truly knowing and being known by another human being. The healing from this realization comes in stages. First comes the anger at having been used, then the grief for the love you thought existed, and finally, if you do the inner work, a profound liberation. Because when someone treats you as disposable, they're confessing their own emotional poverty. No one who has truly faced their shadow could so carelessly discard another soul. Your capacity for authentic connection was never the problem, it was always his limitation. And while that doesn't soften the betrayal, it does reveal an essential truth. You weren't replaced because you were lacking. He moved on quickly because he lacks the depth to appreciate what he lost. 6. Love as a transaction. True love asks for nothing in return. It gives freely without keeping score. Yet if you found yourself in a relationship where affection came with strings attached, where his kindness seemed contingent on your compliance, you weren't experiencing love at all. You were trapped in a transaction. Whether it was unspoken expectations, I'll be sweet to you if you don't nag me about commitment, or outright bargaining. If you lose weight, I'll take you on vacation. This conditional approach to intimacy reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what love actually is. Jung would recognize this dynamic as the work of the persona, the false mask we wear to navigate the world while hiding our true, often unconscious motives. The persona, in Jung's framework, is the curated version of ourselves we present to others, not inherently negative, but dangerous when it completely eclipses the authentic self. A man who operates this way in relationships isn't necessarily calculating. He may genuinely believe his own performance. He might say, "I love you," while meaning, "I love what you do for me," or mistake control for care. "I'm only harsh because I want what's best for you." This distortion occurs because his persona has become a shield against vulnerability. By making love transactional, he maintains the illusion of being generous while actually protecting himself from true emotional risk. If you I'll is a covert contract that keeps real intimacy at bay, ensuring he never has to fully show up or surrender control. What makes this so damaging is how it trains you to abandon your own needs in exchange for scraps of affection. You might have found yourself thinking, maybe if I'm more easygoing/attractive/accommodating, he'll finally love me unconditionally. But the cruel irony is this. Conditional love can't be earned by perfect performance, because its conditions exist precisely to avoid the vulnerability of real commitment. The more you contorted yourself to meet his terms, the more the goalposts shifted, not because you failed, but because his persona required perpetual negotiation to maintain its illusion of superiority. Healing from this dynamic requires a radical redefinition of love. Real love doesn't keep ledgers. It doesn't weaponize affection or make you audition for basic human warmth. If you recognize yourself in this pattern, constantly jumping through hoops only to find the reward was another hoop, know that the problem wasn't your inability to meet his conditions. The problem was that love was never meant to be conditional at all. The right relationship won't feel like a series of transactions, but like coming home to someone who treasures you exactly as you are. Because in the end, the most valuable lesson this painful experience teaches is this: you were never the one who needed to change. The mask was always on the other side of the bargain. 7. The emotional void afterward. There's a particular kind of emptiness that follows relationships where you were used, one that feels more like exhaustion than heartbreak. Instead of the sharp, cleansing pain that comes from losing real love, you're left with a hollow fatigue, as if you've been pouring energy into something that was never really there. This emotional void is your psyche's quiet revelation. What you thought was a connection was actually a one-sided exchange. Jung would describe this as your soul's recognition of the absence of symbolic resonance, that profound, wordless understanding that occurs when two people meet not just physically or emotionally, but at the level of their deepest selves. In Jungian psychology, meaningful relationships create an alchemical reaction between two people's unconscious worlds, what he called the mysterium conjunctionis. When this sacred connection exists, even painful breakups carry a sense of bittersweet wholeness, because something real was forged and must now be mourned. But when you've been used, the aftermath feels disturbingly weightless. You might question why you aren't more devastated, or even blame yourself for not caring enough, but this emotional flatness isn't indifference. It's your inner wisdom confirming what your heart suspected all along. There was no substantial bond to grieve. The fatigue comes from your psyche having strained for months or years to create depth where none existed, like trying to nourish yourself on empty calories. This phenomenon explains why women often feel more relief than sorrow after leaving these relationships. Your unconscious knew the truth long before your conscious mind caught up. That persistent sense of loneliness you felt while with him? It wasn't fear of abandonment, it was your soul's protest against emotional starvation. The dreams you had about searching for him in crowded places only for him to walk right past you? Your unconscious dramatizing the painful reality. He was never truly present. What you're left with afterward isn't the ache of love lost, but the sobering realization of love never found, and the quiet anger at having given your precious energy to a mirage. Healing from this requires honoring your exhaustion as wisdom rather than weakness. That void you feel isn't emptiness. It's the space where self-respect is returning, where real love, both for yourself and from others, will eventually flow. Because now you know the difference between connection and consumption. And that knowing, hard one though it was, is the gift your psyche gave you all along. The ability to recognize when a man isn't loving you, but using you. And to walk away before the void becomes your home. What Jung's wisdom reveals is both unsettling and liberating. The way someone treats you has far more to do with their unconscious struggles than your inherent value. These 7 signs, projection, emotional withholding, convenience, gaslighting, disposability, transactional love, and that haunting emptiness, aren't just red flags about him. They're mirrors reflecting the unhealed parts of his psyche, his unintegrated shadow, his fear of the anima, his resistance to growth. When you recognize these patterns for what they are, something profound shifts. You stop asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" and start understanding the real question, "Why wasn't he capable?" But this isn't just about diagnosing his behavior. It's about reclaiming your own power. Every toxic relationship carries an invitation to go deeper into your own psyche. Where did you ignore early warnings? What parts of your anima, your intuitive voice, did you silence to keep the peace? How might your own shadow, like the fear of being alone or the need to fix others, have kept you tied to someone who only took? Jung's greatest gift is the reminder that awareness breaks cycles. When you understand these dynamics, you'll spot them sooner, walk away faster, and attract partners who've done their own inner work. So tell me in the comments, which of these 7 signs hit closest to home? Was it the whiplash of projection, the exhaustion of one-sided vulnerability, or the chilling realization of being disposable? Your story might be exactly what another woman needs to hear to trust herself again. Remember, the opposite of being used isn't just finding better love. It's becoming so rooted in your own worth that you no longer tolerate breadcrumbs when you deserve a feast. Jung said it best, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Let this be the moment you take back the reins. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more psychology-based insights on relationships and self-discovery. Your journey to conscious love starts here.